You do not have to be on camera for this webinar. Understand that if you are on camera, your image may be captured in the recording. Staying on the webinar represents your consent to being recorded. Please also note the following legal disclaimer. The material presented does not constitute legal advice and is only intended to provide information. Organizations and individuals should independently verify that any information presented is appropriate or applicable to their situation before acting on it. Next slide.
I'd like to introduce you to today's presenters. My name is Suzanne Dave, and I am the Grant Project Assistant for Amity's third-party administrator, and I'm going to pass it on to Mina.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Mina Cabrion, and I am the Training and Technical Assistance Coordinator. I will pass it on to Rebecca.
Thank you so much, Mina. And again, I echo Mina's welcome. We're so glad you're here today. I'm Rebecca Gray. I'm the Grant Administrator for Amity's third-party administrator. Suzanne?
At Amity, we incorporate teachings that center the community before we begin our work. Today, we will use the LA County Land Acknowledgement to recognize the price paid by individuals that has resulted in efforts such as Care First Community Investment. We recognize that we occupy land originally and still inhabited and cared for by the Tonga, Tataviam, Serrano, Kiss, and Chumash peoples. We honor and pay respect to their elders and descendants. We acknowledge that the settler colonization resulted in the genocide of the first peoples. This acknowledgement demonstrates our responsibility and commitment to truth, healing, and reconciliation, and to elevating the stories, culture, and community of the original inhabitants of Los Angeles County. Next slide, please.
Thank you for attending today's Technical Assistance, How to Build an Organizational Budget webinar. We will walk through the budget overview process to prepare you for building an organizational budget. What is the significance of a budget? Expanding its role beyond just a financial document, a budget serves a strategic roadmap for nonprofits, equipping them with the tools for strategic planning and assessing their financial status. Regularly reviewing the budget alongside comparing it with actual cash flow and expenses is crucial for measuring the accuracy of financial forecasts against the organization's real financial situation. Nonprofits are often under scrutiny regarding finances, necessitating clarity on funding sources and expenditure. With shifting circumstances throughout the year, the adaptability of the budget is crucial, highlighting its role as a flexible and responsive financial tool. Consider your nonprofit budget as a guide for prudent spending and safeguarding financial health. Next slide.
Effective nonprofit budgeting. So effective nonprofit budgeting aligns with spending with strategic goals. You ensure your budget reflects short-term needs and long-term objectives, enabling effective mission delivery. It enhances board satisfaction, provides clear financial reports for board members to assess program performance and make informed decisions. And it builds donor confidence. You demonstrate fiscal responsibility and transparency to donors by clearly communicating fund utilization, encouraging trust and support. Next slide, please.
Different nonprofit budgeting approaches. So the first approach is a zero-based budgeting, ZBB. This is a method wherein every expense for each period must be justified from the ground up. ZBB starts from scratch, requiring a fresh evaluation of every expense. 2, rolling forecast. Rolling forecast is a dynamic budgeting technique that involves regularly updating financial projections based on changing circumstances. 3, the nonprofit annual budget is a comprehensive financial plan that outlines projected income and expenses, for the entire fiscal year. And this is probably what most organizations here are used to. 4, variance analysis compares actual financial performance against budgeted projections to assess discrepancies and identify underlying factors. Next slide.
The commonly used budget. The nonprofit annual budget is most used because of its stability and predictability and support for communication and decision-making among stakeholders. It acts as a clear roadmap to allocating resources and managing expenses throughout the fiscal year, fostering accountability and transparency. The annual budget allows for flexibility through periodic reviews and adjustments to address changing circumstances or emerging priorities. Next slide, please.
Slide 7, program costs. Program cost breakdown empowers organizations to strategically plan and manage budgets, enabling them to make compelling arguments for financial support and contracts that cover the full range of service expenses. By employing this approach, nonprofit organizations can effectively allocate funds to ensure the successful implementation and longevity of their programs, enhancing transparency and accountability in financial management practices. Next slide.
Determining your expenses. First, you want to organize expenses into main categories such as staff, contractors, occupancy, and support costs. Next, you want to consider separating staff expenses, which typically constitutes to about 60% to 90% of the budget. Then you want to differentiate between program and other expenses to demonstrate how funds are allocated for the nonprofit's mission. And lastly, you want to recognize the difference between fixed and variable costs. Fixed costs remain constant, such as rent, loan repayments, while variable costs fluctuate with events, allowing for decision-making opportunities. Next slide.
Rebecca, if you're speaking, you're on mute.
Thank you. Okay. Gathering budget data. Developing precise program budgets and allocation strategies relies on gathering data from various sources. It's wise to gather information on past financial performance, funding trends, and relevant market or industry data to inform your budget projections effectively. This approach ensures organizations have the necessary information to create accurate and realistic budgets aligned with their strategic objectives and financial capacities. Next slide. Overview of the budget process breakdown. So here's a breakdown of this process that you can go through step by step. So the first part of the process would be defining your programs. Defining your programs includes establishing structure for accounting. Who's going to do your accounting? How's that going to be done? Identify direct and indirect costs. Direct costs are your staff, your rent. Indirect costs are things that you usually cannot charge to a grant. Number 4, select how to distribute costs. 5, distribute staff costs effectively. You need to allocate direct costs and distribute direct costs fairly. So again, when funders look at your budget, if they see a big discrepancy between staff members who have the same position, there are going to be questions. So you want to make sure that your staff costs are distributed fairly. 8, identify program-specific and general income. So allocate indirect administrative costs. So indirect costs are usually your admin team. They're your accountant, your grant writer, your CEO, your COO. Sometimes these positions can become programmatic positions as well. Like there's many a CEO who also case manages, who also has like a client load. But usually these salaries and these costs are considered indirect. You also need to allocate costs for fundraising. How much is it going to cost you to raise money during the year, or even over 3 to 5 years? And summarize and evaluate what I found. Next slide.
Defining your programs. So you want to outline the various activities constituting each program, reflecting both service delivery and internal operations.
You want to establish a structure for accounting. Use available accounting software while maintaining control over the chart of accounts. This alignment allows accurate financial reporting and streamlines budget tracking.
You want to identify direct and indirect costs. Distinguish between direct costs attributable to specific programs and indirect costs that underpin overall organizational management. Indirect costs are expenses that can't be allocated to a specific product, project, service, etc., where direct costs are expenses you can directly link to a specific project, item, service, or expense category. Next slide.
Select how to distribute costs. Select practical and justified allocation methods for shared direct costs, aiming for simplicity in calculation and maintenance. Distribute staff costs effectively. Precisely allocate staff salaries, benefits, and taxes by consistently and reliably tracking their time. So again, in a lot of grants, in order to be reimbursed for staff costs, you need to show a time card. And usually there are even rules like the time card has to be signed by the employee and by their supervisor. You also want to, this line about allocating benefits, we've seen this a lot in running the CFCI. People will give us staff salaries, but they won't take into account how much on top of the staff salary your organization might be paying in order to cover insurance for your employee, any benefits, medical, dental, vision. Any of those things are over and above the employee's salary. So tracking that is important as well. Reflect each staff member's contributions to program activities and administrative functions, providing a transparent view of program costs and enhancing accountability. If you haven't already, if you don't already have job descriptions, this is how you can build a job description. What is this staff actually doing? What are they being paid for?
When allocate direct costs, assign expenses directly incurred for specific program areas or cost centers to those respective areas. Next slide.
Distribute direct costs fairly. Utilize appropriate allocation methods for shared direct costs, considering factors such as office supplies used across multiple programs. So often to offset some of these direct costs, if you assign it to a grant, people usually assign like a percentage of your office supplies to each funding source that's coming into the organization. And that way, not just one funding source is responsible for giving your whole organization its office supplies. And that also can help you track like which programs use more, which can help you allocate these costs more accurately.
When I identify program-specific and general income, identify income streams specific to each program area and discretionary income allocated to the organization. Next slide.
Allocate indirect administrative costs. Assign administrative costs to accurately reflect program expenses, recognizing their role in enhancing program effectiveness. So indirect costs have gotten a lot of scrutiny lately. There have been a lot of, it used to be a big thing for a funder to say, well, I'll pay for your program, but I don't want to pay for any of your indirect costs. However, if your indirect costs are not paid for, you don't have leadership, you don't have HR, you don't have accounting, you don't have fundraising, and all of these things are necessary for your organization to survive. So making sure that a percentage, most grants will allow you to allocate a percentage of indirect costs, which can go to any of these buckets that I just mentioned, your accountant, your grant writer, all of those things.
You want to allocate fundraising costs. You want to assign fundraising expenses proportionally based on the percentage of total support received by each program, aligning fundraising costs with contributed income. Next slide.
And finally, summarizing and evaluating your budget. After all of these steps, you should summarize and evaluate, conduct a thorough review of the program-based budget or the financial analysis to verify the accuracy and alignment with organizational expectations. This critical evaluation ensures that the budget accurately reflects the organization's financial reality, providing a robust foundation for informed decision-making and strategic planning. Next slide.
Okay, so what we have in front of you is a budget example. So this screenshot shows the personnel component of the budget. So as you will see, we have 3 staff members. We have Sandy, Roberto, Elizabeth. On this budget, you would also see that their fringe benefits is actually tied into their totals, which gives us a grand total of staff salary as of $204,960. Fringe benefits are normally going to be your healthcare benefits. So this is going to be your dental, your medical, your vision. Those are the fringe benefits that are added to these staff. Next slide. Okay, so on this screen, we are seeing the other costs that are associated with a budget. So for this organization, they need a new printer, which is going to cost them about $3,000. They need 5 laptop computers, which is going to range around $3,000. They need ink cartridges for their new printer, and that's going to be $800. And they also need printing paper. This is $500 for the printing paper. So we have a grand total of, let's see, what is the grand two? Okay, so I'm not able to see the bottom of the screen.
Oh, I showed $224,886.
Okay, so this is actually including their indirect costs as well.
Total, I see the total direct cost line is $206,260. And then you're adding an indirect cost at 10%, adding an additional $20,626. So that means that your total costs, direct, indirect, is for this program is $224,886. Additional resources. So here's some other places that you can go to look at webinars. These are free resources. You can go get more education about budgeting. This is a great one, the APLOS CPE webinar, Mastering Budgeting. All these slides and materials will be made available to you. So you will get all of these links when we send out materials. Another great resource is Donor Box, the ultimate guide to nonprofit budgeting. And finally, the National Council of Nonprofits, Budgeting for Nonprofits. All 3 highly recommended.
No, that's my spot. Thanks.
If everybody could please mute. All right, I'm going to hand it over to Suzanne.
Thank you, Rebecca. We will answer all questions from the chat first, and we'll ask the questionee to come off mute if needed for any clarifications. You can email us at tpagrants@amityfdn.org if you have any other questions or comments pertaining to this webinar.
Okay, so we will start on questions. So from the chat, we have a couple. So will this webinar be provided or sent out? So yes, it will. We will actually be uploading everything onto our website. So this one in particular should be there within like the next week or so. And we will send out, an email in regards to where to find that website and all of that. Another one is everyone on this webinar CFCI grantees? So no, so anyone can attend these webinars. And then when will we find out who has been granted? So I'm gonna assume that's for year 3. So year 3 award letters have already gone out, correct, Rebecca? So please check your spams, your junk email if you have not heard back. If you did not receive an email, then that means
Well,
you were not.
yeah, we're not awarded at this time. So the contracting process is kind of long and hairy. And we have lost organizations during the contracting process, which means we go right back to the pool of applicants and pull a new awardee, a different awardee. So no one is declined for year 3 yet. There are no declinations yet. We're not going to send out declines until all of the awardees that have been selected are in contract or are actively contracted. And then we will send out decline letters, and I'm really hoping that's before July.
Yeah, so please check all of your email boxes or with your grant writer, anyone who you placed on that application. Anyone could have honestly received that email because multiple people are listed. So another one was, are there any resources in regards to support with identifying fringe costs? So we can definitely create something for you and we can upload it onto our website. There will be a specific resource portion, but we definitely do recommend to also look into these additional resources that is on the screen.
Yeah, all of these additional resources, and again, you will receive a link. Oh, sorry. All these additional resources do cover indirect costs, the great mystery of indirect costs.
So is the work of the executive director considered a direct or indirect cost?
Usually indirect. They provide leadership, but that's not a direct program. So I have seen people allocate a percentage of the executive director's time because they have to supervise the program directors. So that supervision is program related. And this is how I have seen an executive director's whole salary get covered. Like if you put a percentage here, there, and everywhere, then sooner or later you've got near a 100% salary. But often, unless the executive director is actively involved in providing direct services, it's usually an indirect cost.
Is this for the grants we applied for in January? So year 3, yes. How many years will these grants be occurring now that we are in year 3?
So Mina, I'm sorry, I'm just going to step in here and say we're not going to address any more year 3 questions. We're here to talk about budgets today. Sorry, that was for attendees, Mina, not for you. But
no worries. Thank you.
But I know that if you have questions, please email us at this address, tpagrants@amityfdn.org. If you have questions about year 3, please email us and we will get back to you.
And then we will be uploading this recording onto our website within the next week. So definitely keep an eye out for that. If you're physically sponsored, does the indirect cost cover that too, or is it separate?
So you can use your indirect cost percentage to pay your fiscal sponsor. Fiscal sponsors usually, I mean, that's a really great place to put that percentage of indirect cost that you get, for instance, in the CFCI grants and in most grants. You'll get a little line item that says, you can have 10% on top of how much this program costs. You can charge 10% more for this whole grant. And that whole percentage, all those indirect costs could go to your fiscal sponsor. It depends on what your fiscal sponsor charges you. I think most fiscal sponsors charge around a 15% per grant fee to help manage the grant. So yeah, 15% indirect costs, it could totally go to your fiscal sponsor. Suzanne, do you remember, or Mina, did people, oh, I'm trying to remember if fiscal sponsors show up as a line item.
They do not.
Yeah, we can't,
So
yeah, we don't allow it. Go ahead, sorry.
I've seen some physical sponsors do 0% out of the budget, honestly, and some do up to 15. So it just really depends on the person or on the physical sponsor. Okay, so if you're physically sponsored, does the indirect cost cover that too, or is it separate?
So if you're fiscally sponsored, the indirect costs can cover your fiscal sponsor fee. So it can be covered under your indirect costs can all go to your fiscal sponsor.
Is indirect cost used solely for paying contractors and staff, or can it also be used for other items?
So indirect cost is specifically your other items line item. Your staff should appear on your budget. Your there's in non-personnel, usually in the non-personnel section of a budget, there's a line for subcontractors because that's a programmatic expense. Unless it's like, I mean, there might be some situations where it's like capacity building, like, you know, helping your board, helping your, like a consultant to help your board do the 5-year plan, right? That probably would not be allowed under the contractor line item. But indirect costs are all those things that you cannot put in a programmatic budget, the things that are not providing direct services to participants in your program. Like your accountant is not providing direct services to participants. So often accountants, all fundraising, the C-suite, all these people are paid out of indirect costs.
If a person, the director of the organization, and instruct participants, shall that person be paid separately for his or her work?
So sorry, Mina, is the question, if the person is both the leader and a provider of services?
Daryl, would you be able to come off mute from Saving All Kids and further clarify your question, please?
Hello, and yes, Ms. Gray, that was my question. If the person is the executive director and he or she is also instructing students, do they get paid out of 2 different pools?
So
and
not,
just allocate,
I'm
and
sorry.
just allocate the time and just allocate the time correctly, or how would
Right.
that work?
So whatever percentage of time the executive director is spending delivering direct services, you would divide that. And if it's 100% of their time or 90% of their time, and then 10% of their time is spent doing other stuff, that's fine. Like you absolutely can pay your executive director for direct services.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
How can we increase our project management cost from 12% to 15%?
Usually it depends on the funder. I've seen some funders say it's only you get up to 10% for indirect costs, and that's it. There's been a push in the nonprofit because we all recognize that indirect costs are vital to our survival as an organization. Like, we cannot deliver programs if we don't have an administrative office. We just can't do it. There's been a push more and more to recognize that indirect cost percentages, like if funders must break out indirect costs, and I think the government always will. I think the county's up to 15% now. And of course, there's a push to get to like 20 or 25% indirect costs. And if you want to see that happen, if you've got a funder who's limited your indirect cost, call them up, right? Develop a relationship with them. Tell them why a 10% indirect cost rate is limiting your ability to deliver programs because you can't pay the staff you need to keep your organization going. You can always, I feel like the fundee, the funder awardee relationship should be a conversation. And if you have input for your funder, I mean, that's so much has changed in the last 10 years because small nonprofits have spoken truth to power. Like that really is the thing that's happened. Small nonprofits have spoken truth to power, and large funders have become aware of things like diversity, equity, and inclusion, which 10 years ago nobody was even talking about, but now everybody's talking about it. So if you haven't, if you consider your indirect cost rate to be too low with a funder, talk to your funder.
Will we get a notification on when this recording and slides go up on the website? So if you are one of our CFCI grantees, yes, keep an eye out for our monthly bulletin. If you didn't check it out, one went out around the 15th of this month. But yeah, we'll definitely let you guys know. And then how do you best allocate program grant percentages across personnel?
Suzanne, do you want to take that on?
So how do you allocate program percentage across personnel? I would say that, as you're working in the program, you would need to figure out what those program costs are. Every program has different staff associated with it, right? So you're not necessarily going to have the executive director working on a program, right? So the program staff that are associated with that particular program, I would determine what their salaries are. I always would like to just do a annual search to see what if it's an administrative staff person, I would just do what that administrative staff salary is. Like there's websites out there that you can actually Google search this information just to find like what's appropriate in your state, in your county.
Like Glassdoor does that, I think. Is that right? Glassdoor.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you can actually just figure out what that staff cost is for the year. Now, if this staff is part-time, then they're working at 50% of the time of this particular project or program. So then you would include 50% of that annual salary onto the budget. So let's say it's 40,000 for an administrative assistant. Half of that is 20,000, and that should be noted on the budget.
I think this is where tracking time is really important too. If you have a staff person who's they're servicing different programs, you should know what percentage of their time is being spent on program A and what percentage of their time is being spent on program B. And then you can divide up, then you can charge program A 70% of their salary if they spend 70% of their time over there. And program B, you can charge 30% of their salary. So I would say that, you can, again, look at the web searches are your friend to find out what an appropriate median salary is in Los Angeles. It's different from nationwide. And then think about it interest. So this is why tracking hours becomes important and having timesheets is important.
Are there services to help fray the cost of fringe benefits?
I mean, you can hire a fiscal sponsor, but then you will end up paying them. Usually like the contracts I've seen, the way the fiscal sponsor gets paid is sometimes they get a flat rate per year. It's an annual contract you have with them, and you're going to pay them $25,000 over the year to be your accountant. Some fiscal sponsors are fundraisers. They do all the fiscal sponsor acts as your HR usually. They can provide policies and procedures for you. They're supposed to provide all the things that it's really difficult for a small nonprofit to keep in-house. That's what your fiscal sponsor is supposed to do. I've seen some contracts where fiscal sponsors say, we get 10% of every grant that comes in. And that's the indirect cost amount that you have asked for on that grant, and that'll just go straight to your fiscal sponsor. So the best way to pay for indirect costs is to get unrestricted funding. Unrestricted funding is the funding stream. So there are no rules about where that money has to go. That is your fundraiser, your event, your bake sale. There are funders in Los Angeles, the Ralph M. Parsons Foundation, the Amundsen Foundation. It's the other big one.
The Mark Taper Foundation.
Yeah, Taper, thank you. Yeah, Weingart also. They offer sometimes very large grants with no restrictions. So usually when you're looking at your budget, you're thinking about, yeah, you want to get some grants and contracts, usually government, they're going to have very strict rules. But then you want to have your bingo night or your bake sale or, your pass the hat, your dinner, whatever it is where money flows in and you do not have to, you don't have to provide a, here are the hours worked to get this money, right? Like this is that, not already obligated funds that you can just apply to everything.
Okay. Is the required insurance an indirect cost?
So usually insurance is a line item in non-personnel. When you get a budget, you'll have usually the personnel sections on the top and you list all your staff. And then you've got a non-personnel section, and that is rent, utilities, office supplies, subcontractors, insurance can appear there. Often, a funder will give you like a budget template that has other, it'll say other, and then there'll be these blank lines that you can fill in, and you can totally put your insurance costs in there. They might get back in touch with you and say, we can't pay for your insurance, or we will only pay for the percentage increase of insurance that this program is going to bring upon your organization, right? Like they might have all kinds of rules about it. Usually though, the way most nonprofit organizations pay for their insurance is they just allocate a little bit to every grant that they can, and until it's 100% paid off.
And let's see. Oh, someone already put the names in the chat. Thank you so much. What is Amity's requirement for indirect costs?
So we're not a funder. We don't have a requirement. We're working with LA County. LA County has a 50, I don't know, it might still be 12% for some contracts. For the contract that Amity is acting as third-party administrator for. So again, we're just passing the money through. The money is LA County money. The money is taxpayer money. That's what the CFCI funds are. And they're coming through us. And LA County, in our contract, it says we can go up, you can get up to 15% indirect costs. I've seen everything between 10 and 25%. Oh, so larger organizations negotiate with the federal government to specify what their indirect cost rate is legally. And if you have done that, if you've negotiated with the federal government and you have proved that your indirect cost rate should be, I once heard that University of Southern California, USC, that they had a 55% indirect cost rate with the federal government, which was amazing. But most of the time, I have seen the last organization I was with, they negotiated a 28%. And once that's in place, for every government contract you get, that's your federally designated indirect cost rate. Except with the city of LA. I don't know how the city of LA gets away with this, but the city of LA is allowed to ignore your federal indirect cost rate, which is a bummer.
Alrighty, and then do you pay a person with 2 different positions 2 separate checks for that week of services?
I mean, that would be a really clean way to handle your book. Suzanne, do you have an answer for that? I'm pretty sure we don't do that here, but.
So I would say, on a grant, if you're paying someone for 2 different positions, it's going to cause a red flag, for the funder that's providing that funding to you. So you want to just make sure that you're allocating one person to a specific program. that they're working on, right? So let's say, for instance, you have two different programs. Let's say you have, I don't know, an after school program, but then you also have like an arts enrichment program. And then you have Sarah working the after school program, and you decide, oh, you know what, I want Sarah to also work over here. Like if Sarah needs to work both programs, then you need to make sure that you're including a percentage of time that she spent on each program. I hope that answers your question. You know, you just definitely don't want to say 100% for Sarah here at this after school program and another 100% here at the arts enrichment program, because it's going to cause a red flag.
Yeah, I'd say you don't. Most organizations just cut one check to their employee. Just make sure your records, you know, again, they're supposed to have a time card that shows this many hours over here and this many hours over there. They sign it, and and a supervisor signs it, and that is proof that they, you know, like that is proof of the allocation of their hours. But usually that results in one check.
Yeah, so you're processing the payroll for your employees, then the total amount of their hours will go onto the paycheck for that pay period. So if they're doing 40 hours here and 40 hours there, you know, it would be all totaled up on that one paycheck.
And let me see what else is in here. Give me 1 minute. Okay, we already asked that. Are we able to adjust our budget that we submitted with the application if we did not include insurance costs?
If you have a question about a year 3 or year 1 or year 2 grant, please reach out to your grant advocate.
And are you allowed to have a personal position under salaries to help with grant management and human resource requirements?
So that is an indirect cost, and there usually that is a disallowed cost. That would not be an allowed line item. Fundraising is not a direct cost for programs. I want to say about the last question too. Yes, and this is true for, I think, for universally for all grants. So you write a grant, right? You write a grant for 1 year or 2 years or 3 years. You're dreaming big. You're thinking about all the things you need. Maybe this is a program you've never done before. And 3 months in, you suddenly realize that you said you needed about $200 worth of paper products, but it turns out that actually you need $1,000 worth of paper products, and you don't have a line item for it. Call your funder, work with your funder. In our case, you're going to work with your grant advocate and do a budget modification. Funders do not expect you to have a crystal ball and know exactly how the world and your life is going to turn out. I mean, when I think about all those organizations that got slapped in the face with COVID, who are offering direct services and were getting money for offering direct services, and suddenly there were no direct services, that doesn't mean that they didn't get funded. That means that they did a budget modification and they found out different ways to do the things that they do.
Does the physical sponsor and the contractors have to be on the insurance, or just the physical sponsor?
That's usually in the contract language. I'm trying to remember what, does anyone remember what it is for us? I believe that all subcontractors have, so if your subcontractor, I think, is working just with your staff, I feel like they have to be covered. I know for sure if your subcontractor is working with your participants, they need to be covered by insurance because they could be sued. So they need to be covered.
And the last question, are there requirements about how they allocate hours? Can it be estimates by quarter hour, or do they need to drill down more precisely?
I think quarter hour is certainly fair. I think it's fair. I think that's fair. Suzanne, do you have any experience with this? I feel like I've never heard of anybody, you know, calling someone up and refusing 15 minutes. I don't know. Suzanne, sorry.
Can you repeat the question again?
Yes. Are there requirements about how they allocate hours? Can it be estimates by quarter hour, or do they need to drill it down more precisely?
So when it comes to actually hours worked, if they're not a salary position, I would not do an estimate. But if they're an hourly employee, then you should actually monitor the amount of hours that that employee will work on a particular project per week.
And is that true, Suzanne, down to the minute? Like if they work 3 hours and 23 minutes, is that or is the law that then they've worked 3.5 hours because they've worked the better part of a quarter?
So it depends on, like, like some companies have like a payroll scale where they're like, okay, after 23 minutes, you can automatically get paid 0.5 hours. So that's half of an hour automatically after, I believe it's 21 minutes.
Okay, so you have to have a policy in place about how you're going to handle that.
Right.
So it sounds like that's up to the organization.
What if they're salaried employees?
So if their salary, they're just going to get the amount of salary every payroll. So if they're at, I don't know, let's say it's around 8,000 a month, and that's what their salary would be every payroll.
You can, when you have to build a timesheet for a salaried employee, like what has happened for me in most of my career, is my timesheet just says 8 hours, 8 hours, 8 hours, 8 hours, 8 across Monday through Friday. They just allocate 8 hours. They show a 40-hour work week, even though I've rarely worked. Usually it's far more than 40 hours, but that's how you can do that time card. It's an exempt employee, show 40 hours on the time card, no questions asked, basically.
And do time cards have to be signed if they are processed by ADP?
Well, that's a great question.
So I do know that on, internally, the timesheet should be signed by whoever approves the timesheets. But when it comes to ADP, this is information that's being transported from the timesheet into ADP based on what the employee worked. So whoever the supervisor if they're only using ADP to approve timesheets, time cards, and the supervisor of that employee will approve those hours in ADP. I have a payroll background. So once upon a time, we used timesheets where the actual supervisor had to sign off on the actual timesheet, but things have changed since then. So now things are more electronically done. So the way the approval will happen in ADP, if it's directly in ADP, is that whoever the manager or supervisor of that employee, they should go ahead and approve those hours in ADP.
Yeah, it's usually like it's a button, right? So they just click a button, approve time card, and then that counts as their signature.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And then for executive directors, do you suggest salary, wages, or hourly?
I mean, it depends on where you are as an organization. If you're a really small organization and you are the executive director and you are delivering the programs, then you can call yourself an executive director, assign 100% of your salary because it's a program expense, right? All you're doing is delivering, like what you're doing. The way you lead your organization is you deliver direct services. And if you can, if you can allocate, and it depends on. Oh, Suzanne, I'm just now remembering there are I think the rules are all around hourly or I think there are some state of California rules that might apply to this. Is that right?
Yeah, so in the state of California,
Right.
anyone who works over 8 hours is automatically going to be overtime. Anything over 12 hours is double time. And then also anything over 40 hours in 1 week is considered overtime. Different states vary, but I know state of California, we have all those beautiful benefits when it comes to payroll. So
at that point, it's probably better to just say you've got an exempt flat, you've got a salary rather than paying hourly. I think it's up to the organization though.
Cool. And that is all the questions. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. We appreciate all of your time and your questions. If you have any other questions that, may come up later on, please email us at tpaawards@amityfdn.org.
Sorry,
And
TPA grants. TPA grants.
Sorry, TPA grants.
Yeah,
I'm
here
so
it
sorry.
is. It's on the screen.
It's on the screen. TPA grants at amityfdn.org. Thank you so much, Rebecca.
Sure.
So definitely email us. We will have this webinar up within the next week. And again, thank you so much for joining us. This was recorded. We'll send it out, and have a fabulous Wednesday, everyone. Goodbye.
For everyone who is not a grantee, we will send out the link to our general. We will let you know when it's posted. We'll let everyone know when it's posted. Thanks,
Thank you very
everybody.
much.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Very
Thank
much.
you. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone.